I've got my shattered image prepared here. I've done all the gluing and all of the contour work. So contour work being just the outlines and the lines inside of the drawing where I can see differences between either colors or values. And what I want to do to add color to this is anywhere that I have an area marked off for where I have a shift between a color or a value, I have a line. And right before I begin coloring, I want to get rid of that line almost entirely until it's barely visible just before I begin to color, because what can happen is, and especially with lighter colors, is that when you're coloring over top of graphite, what happens is it traps the graphite underneath the colored pencil, and it can make a dark gray smudgy mark that you'll never ever be able to erase. It'll stay underneath the colored pencil forever, and it just does not look attractive. This is especially noticeable in lighter areas like skin tones and off-white and yellow and things like that. So let me show you what I'm talking about right here real quick, just for a visual. So I've got a piece of paper right here, and I'm going to make a mark with my pencil. Zoom into that real quick. So I've got a mark with my pencil, and I've got some colored pencils here. Now, I'm going to choose a light color. So let's say yellow, why not? That's a light color. And I'm going to color next to that. So you can see the yellow, nice and crisp and clean. It's just yellow. But as soon as I cover yellow over top of this line, look and see what happens. Not only does it darken that mark, but it also pushes the graphite around on the surface of the paper. And while I can still erase the pencil right here, where it's not covered up with any colored pencil, but if I try to erase that colored pencil, that's always going to be there. I might have some limited success at getting some of it up, but it will never be gone. It'll always be trapped underneath that pencil, and that's just not very attractive. So let's say you want to have a line there because you need a line to see. Well, you can erase it almost completely. Now, I've left a little bit of it still visible right here. As a matter of fact, since I drew it so dark, I can probably get away with erasing even more. Now, with that gone, if I go and I color over that, the appearance of that line is a lot less pronounced. It's still there though. So for really light colors, you're gonna wanna try your best to erase completely. This example is an extreme one because what I would normally do is I would draw a very, very light line for my drawing, and when I erase it, it will erase pretty much completely, and then I really won't see any leftovers in my coloring at all, which is what I want for my drawing. I don't really want to see any graphite trapped underneath my pencil. So that's the very most important thing to remember with graphite and colored pencils, is that you can trap it. So that's a pro tip right there. Now I want to move on to coloring techniques. So let's talk about that next. There are several different coloring techniques that I want to talk about. And they all have to do with blending, with the type of technique you want to use to create smooth blends, and also how to create different values of the same color. So I've got my colored pencils right here, and I just want to go over how to create different values using the same color. And I think the one that'll be easiest to tell with is going to be black. So black, it's black. Well, when you press really firmly, it's black. You don't get much darker than that with colored pencils. So let's zoom into this area right here and talk about that. The darker the color, the more pressure you have to use to create it. So here I'm using quite a good deal of pressure to create that black. And that's going to be the total sum of what can come out of this pencil right here. Now if I want a lighter version of this color, all I have to do is modulate how much pressure I apply to the paper with the pencil tip. So starting out really, really firmly, I get my black. But then if I gradually lessen the amount of pressure, what happens is the pencil doesn't apply as much pigment to the paper. And you can get gradients from pencils. So I can get a dark to a medium to a light to a very light version of the same color using the same color pencil without any blending of different colors with this. However, if I want to blend a color with black, I would start with it not full strength. Let's say I want to blend, I don't know, like a dark red. I want to make a dark red. So red on its own looks like that, full strength, okay? But if I take this red and I color over that black, and then I also change how much pressure I'm using from here to here, I can put that red over top of that black and layer it over it, thus creating a shade of red, so a very dark version of red. If I then continue to press firmly, but then over here begin to fade and let that come off, I will begin to create an even lighter version of red, which then I could probably blend with white to create kind of a pinkish appearance. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is gonna smooth everything out and kind of make it nice and silky. So you can see from black to red to pink, okay, a full blend. Now this is just using hatching, so there might be some slight scratchiness to this. If I wanted to eliminate that, the next step would be to cross hatch. So instead of just hatching, which is shading or coloring using one direction, what I would do is I would change the direction of my stroke. And I can do this one of two ways. I can either reposition my hand and stroke from a different direction using that method, or I can turn the paper and continue stroking in the same direction with my hand, but since the paper is turned, the strokes are going in a different way. So this is a good way to get a smooth laydown without full saturation, meaning there's still some relief for the paper to come through the pigment, and that's where you get this kind of slightly like fuzzy, splotchy look. That in and of itself is a way to get a little bit of texture in your piece. But if you don't want that texture and you want everything to be smooth, then you might blend with white to kind of seal it in. And it's very much like using a blending stump when you're shading with graphite, and you would cross hatch with that as well. So that dark gray became kind of a medium gray. So you need to take note, anytime you use white to blend, it's going to lighten the color. And if that's something that you don't necessarily want, you can always go back over the blended area with the color you had originally and kind of revisit it and darken it back down, because what's happened is that the white has smoothed out the pores and the tooth of the paper, so that any subsequent color that you add over top of that will automatically be smoother than it was on your initial pass. So that's how you can get a smooth color without, that little fuzzy or scratchy texture that you might get if you're just kind of randomly making marks and not considering the appearance of the texture on the paper. So that's important to note. Probably the most important thing to be aware of when you're coloring is color theory and how certain colors are made, and by mixing certain colors together, you can create new colors. So let's say you have a color, maybe this kind of orangey brown right here, and you're not lucky enough to have a gigantic set of color pencils, but you need to make an orangey brown. Well, what would you start with? Would you start with orange? You could. So what you want to do is you want to look at the color you're trying to make and see what colors you can identify in that area. I can see a little bit of light brown, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of orange. So those are the colors that I would choose to create that blend. So, and you're always going to want to have a piece of scratch paper around because you want to test these colors out. The paint that's on the pencil and the name is a good starting point, but it is not necessarily exactly what's going to come out of the tip of the pencil when you put it on white paper. So this brown is called light umber, and just looking at it, it looks like a good, decent brown, but it may not be the exact brown that I need. I might need something a little bit redder. So this is called sienna brown, which has a slightly more ruddy tone to it. This is kind of a cool brown. This is more warm. Then we've got just straight up orange, okay? And that's very bright. And then there's the yellow that I was using before, and we know how bright that is as well. So these may be the right colors, or I might be lucky enough to have some kind of colors that are already pre-blended. This is called goldenrod, and it's already kind of a slightly orangey light brown, so I might be able to use that. So what I like to do is I have the little swatches that I have right here, and I've got my little piece that I'm trying to emulate the color with, and I'm going to start by putting down some of this. I'm going to start with this goldenrod right here, and I'm putting it right next to this because what I want to do is I might get lucky and get really close to that color, and it already is really close. But it might also need some other colors layered in with it to blend with it. So I'm going to try some of this and see if that's the right direction to take. That might be a little dark, so I'm going to add some orange to kind of brighten it up a little bit. And it's going to take some trial and error to get the right mixture and the right blend of colors. I might add some of this over it. I don't want to smooth it down too much because I do want it to have slightly of a rougher texture. So you can see how many different colors I'm employing to get the appearance of this fur. And then I put it in there and I look and I see how close of a match did I get to that. Pretty close. It's not 100% perfect, but it's almost there. So I think that's a good color blend, and you can see how many different colors I used to get that color. I used 5 different colors together to get that color, or those combinations of colors right there, because it's not just one color that's visible in that one little area. It kind of goes from like a darker to a lighter brown. And then still in this same piece, I have another brown beneath that in this shadowed area that's got a higher concentration of that darker brown with a little bit more orange, a lot less yellow and goldenrod in it. So I would have to remix that color as well to try to make sure that I have the right blend of colors going into that. So layering colors and making custom blends of colors is something that you're going to have to do in order to create the picture that you're trying to make. Flesh tones are another tricky thing to try to match. This woman has quite pale skin, but even in this paleness, you can see some areas of shadow that suggest some form. Like here, I can see the edge of her jawline and the pit of her neck, and there's some areas of highlight as well. I can't rely on any one color to get me this color. And if I go to the colors that are kind of flesh tones in my color pencil box right here, I've got this called light peach, which is it's kind of there. This one here, which is called cream. I also have some pinks over here, which are more or less useless all on their own, but can be used to add to a flesh tone. And really, when we're saying flesh tones, it could be a range of different colors. This just happens to be a very pale flesh tone. You might have a picture with a person that has a medium complexion or a dark complexion or an olive complexion, in which case you need to be sensitive to the different colors that you're seeing in those different flesh tones. But in this case, since it's very light, I'm gonna start with these, might not even use that, and see where that takes me. I'll also need some browns to work on these shadowed areas. So let's take a look over here and get a clean spot on my paper right here and see what we can do with this. Again, I'm gonna test these straight out of the pencil and see what they can create at full strength. Of course, we know there's our brown. This cream is kind of close, but it's a little bit too yellow. I need to kind of tone it down, probably with a little bit of white and kind of maybe with a very, very light application of this light peach. So let's see if I begin with the light peach. Let me get a very, very, and I mean a very, very light coat of that, something that you can barely see. And this is gonna be like an underlying color that I'll then color over with and layer with that light peach. So that's not far off the mark. Let me add some of this cream over top to see if I can warm that up a little bit. That's getting even closer. So we're getting near, but then I've got these areas here that I would need to suggest some shadow. So if I'm trying to do this area at the pit of her neck, how much of this do I add? And is this even the right brown? And it looks like it might be. So let me see if it is. That's pretty darn close. It might actually be a little bit too light. I might need to grab one of these other ones. So I've got, whoops. I've got this color right here, which is dark brown. Nice creative name right there. And I might just put a smidge of that in. Now, I would probably blend that and soften it with the cream so it's not too strong. Okay. And then come back with some of this light peach to get some of that warmth back. Because brown, this is kind of a cool brown. And then maybe white to blend it all together and soften it, which, remember, it lightens colors, so you might need to come back and redarken some things. So you can see I'm going back and forth until I find just the right combination of these colors. Okay, I feel like that's a pretty good representation of that little area right there. So coloring is one of those things. There's trial and error and experimentation. And if you do it on a separate piece of paper just to test things out, you won't end up doing something on your piece that you can't take back. Because the thing about colored pencils is, once it's down on the surface, it's pretty much there. You can only make the colors darker. You can't make them any lighter. So that's one of the downfalls of colored pencils. They are highly controllable, unlike paints, because they're a dry medium. You don't have to worry about things being unpredictable. But with that same thing, whereas with paint, all you have to do to let it dry to fix it, and then paint over it. With colored pencils, it's not quite the same way. So you have to be a little bit more cautious and do some tests and some experimentations and practice your blends before you put them on your actual piece. So that's why I spent the time kind of practicing with some different colors on my swatches here so that I can get them in my drawing here. So I'm gonna put that into practice with some time lapse. Well, here's the finished product. So you can see from the time lapse, I used quite an array of colored pencils. I had a scratch piece of paper with me the whole time that I would test out what colors came out of the pencil and then fine tune my color blends and my custom colors and figure out how they looked. I would always put a swatch and then test to see how colors looked and how well they matched to what I was creating here. It's always a good idea to have the scratch piece of paper right next to you so you can test your blends on it and make sure that they're just what you need, and then just use, that next to the pieces. So I'm gonna pop this one in and kind of compare how close things look. That's another thing to do, is occasionally pop it in and see how close you're matching up with the pieces that you're doing. So there's one, popping it in, popping it out, just to check and see how accurate your coloring is. So depending on the size and the complexity of your picture, this could take between 2 to 3 hours, 4 at the max, and that's a couple classes worth of time. In any case, to get good solid coloring, you really need to use the techniques that I demonstrated here. Be able to use full pressure. You don't want to have any really light coloring where it's patchy and see-through. You want to get good color blends and good solid saturated color. That's what's going to make it look the best. Well, I hope you have a good time doing this, and I hope yours comes out just the way you want it. All right, there it is.